Hello, everyone. So, for my presentation, I chose to do the book Reading Don't Fix No Chevys. Um, I particularly chose this book because I teach ninth and 10th grade English, and a great deal of my students will often say to me that what we read is not relevant to them because they want to go into a trade or their career doesn't have anything to do with, say, Romeo and Juliet. So this particularly stood out to me just by the title. And as I read it, I realized just how relevant it is to teaching secondary English. Well, really any English, but particularly for me, secondary English. So, just a quick overview of the book. Um, Reading Don't Fix No Chevys was written by Michael Smith and Jeffrey Wilhelm. It was published in 2002. So, it was published over 20 years ago, but the relevance is still here today. Um, Even more so today because, children are constantly changing. So the book follows a group of boys who do not like reading. What I like the most about this book and the study within itself is that Smith and Wilhelm include a vast variety of different types of students of all different ethnicities. They have black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and then also they had those who were considered low achievers, high achievers, and average. So they were getting results from all types of boys, not just one. So I thought that was very interesting and I thought that was well done. Because it boils down to the fact that even your high achievers, while they may do the activities that are about the reading that may be kind of forced upon them, they don't necessarily enjoy it or find connections with it. This book discusses how to make the readings more interesting for all students, which we'll get into that a little bit later. They work with boys from grades 7 to 12, and they work with them from 3 different states and 4 separate school systems. So, like I said earlier, they don't just look at one particular group of boys. Not only were they different ethnicities and different achievement levels, but also they were from different states. So this is about the different types of data they collected and a summary of what they found. They used 4 separate types of data when they collected their analysis. They asked each boys to rank a series of activities from the ones they most enjoyed to the ones they least enjoyed. When I read about this, the first thing that popped to my mind is I need to do that within my class. At the end of the year, which is quickly approaching, I believe that I'm going to have this as an activity for my students to rank the things we done in class from their favorite to their least favorite. And if there's a common denominator there, it may be time for me to omit something or redo how I teach it. The boys discussed how the characters in the story did or did not relate to them. These responses were then followed by an interview session. So that too, when you have a classroom full of 25, 30 students and 6 periods a day, it can sometimes be hard to have that one-on-one time with your students. But this kind of reclarified how I need to incorporate that more into my day-to-day lessons. Also, including more books that relate to my particular group of students. So this is only I've been teaching for 2.5 years. So this is my almost 3rd year teaching. And, a lot of people think that you can just go year to year and use the same lesson plans. There's no way. You have to morph it, for one, based on what you see is your strength as a teacher, but also morph it into what is going to be best beneficial for that particular group of students you have. Because, individualized instruction is key to keeping kids engaged. Smith and Willem collected a 3-month analysis of what the young boys read, wrote, watched, and listened to, both in school and at home. As time advanced, the participants were observed in different classes, outside of class, such as in the library, lunchroom, or on the sports field, or at home and work. So I like this as well. And this is not necessarily something that can be easily done. Of course, we can ask students and have activities where, they tell us about themselves or talk about what they want to do after graduation. But this is not something that can always be easily observed. Now, if they're on the school sports team, or if, you see them working at McDonald's, or that their dad is the local mechanic, those things, can be easily observed. But sometimes it's not quite that simple. So it's important that we take time to get to know our students individually so we can make the lessons we teach more engaging for them, which is a big part of what this book is about. So overall, they discussed how inquiry-based instruction was key to basically keeping students, particularly boys, engaged in the day-to-day lessons. So I discussed this book with 4 of my fellow teachers. They're in the English department as well at Princeton High School. To open the discussion, I used this graphic organizer. And now 2 graphic organizers were used as we went through our professional development. But this particular one is what I used to kind of start the discussion. I had them fill this out on when they were in school. Tell me what you hated to read. What book did you have to read that a teacher may have assigned you? And tell me why you hated it. So, a lot of my colleagues would say things like Shakespearean pieces, or they would say things like Animal Farm. And then we got to talking and we realized that some of the things that even we didn't like in high school, we're teaching now. Granted, I think a lot of it is becoming more mature and seeing the beauty behind a lot of these classic pieces. But a lot of it is also, you come to the conclusion of, oh, well, this is just a classic and this is what's always been taught in whatever grade. So we must continue to do that as tradition. And part of that, is a great thing. But in a lot of times, I feel like that can get boring and it's not structured towards the particular students that you're teaching. So that's what we talked about. One teacher in particular, she had put George Orwell's Animal Farm down for the book she hated. And we all just looked at her and we all laughed because we knew that was one of the first books she read with her 9th grade. So, guys, we see how, especially with English teachers, we feel this pull to stay with the classics. And sometimes that's great, but there's different ways, modified, that we can do this that's not as traditional and not as boring. So going back, the discussion points we talked about after we filled out the T-chart was what makes classic pieces of literature? And also, why do we feel obligated to teach them? So we discussed things like Taming of the Shrew, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, those types of things. And then we talked about, too, how a lot of times, such as Romeo and Juliet, those things can be relatable for high school students, but it is up to us to make that apparent of how this is still relevant to the students, how Romeo and Juliet are very similar while in an extreme, while being a royals and while being wealthy and that type of thing. While they may be in extreme circumstances, their character traits and how they react in their particular situation mirrors what we see in a lot of the high school students. that's difficult for students to understand because of the language and because it took place so long ago. So we discussed how we can make that more engaging for students. We talked about showing them West Side Story. We talked about the more modern adaptations of Romeo and Juliet, and simply only teaching certain parts of the Shakespearean language. So we discussed bunches of different books that we lean towards, but that just being the first one that comes to mind where I teach ninth. Another thing we talked about is not being afraid to stray away from books that may not be common. So things that are newer but may have similar themes to the classics. We talked about like using The Help instead of To Kill a Mockingbird, or using The Help in 10th grade and doing something else in ninth grade. We talked about a variation of different things. So changing it up based on the students is very relevant. We teach the COVID kids right now, so we have to have something that they can relate to, or else we're going to lose them. How can we ensure the things that we read in class are both meaningful and entertaining? As I said before, we teach students who are going into all different career fields and who come from all different backgrounds. So we have to somewhat mold what we read towards that. And as they discuss in Reading Don't Fix No Chevys, we have to give students somewhat of a choice in what they read. Otherwise, they're going to feel out of control and feel like reading is more of a chore than something that can be done for enjoyment. So, as I kind of touched on a minute ago, we talked about different engaging activities. We all took notes on this graphic organizer of evidence from Reading Don't Fix No Chevys and an activity that we can do in the classroom. So, first thing we talked about was how independent reading time and how we sometimes, like, we had all tried it as a bell ringer. And with honor students, it seems to work and they seem to enjoy it. But for example, getting fourth period right after lunch and expecting them to be quiet and sit down and read a book, regardless if it's of their choice or not, does not typically work that well from my experience and from other teachers' experience. So we were thinking of ways to get them to read maybe smaller pieces such as poetry that is based more on their interests. We talked about too how important it was that students are aware of how to do research. And we talked about how giving them freedom in research, researching topics that they're actually, that they care about, can lead to better results and lead to more engagement. So we talked about how Smith and Wilhelm used those methods. We quoted from the book, and we used activities that we can potentially use in the classroom. So this is my conclusion on the book. Reading Don't Fix No Chevys opened my mind to many different ways to create an environment that students will be more engaged. I forget, and I know this sounds silly, but oftentimes I forget that not everybody is a huge English nerd. I forget that people didn't love Romeo and Juliet as much as I did in ninth grade. And that's okay. We're all different. It just can sometimes, you think you can give it to them black and white, especially when you first start out as a teacher, and say, okay, here's this and let's talk about it. And you can't. You have to draw them in. And this just kind of reiterated on that a little bit. So we have to look through the lens of a teenager or a child or a boy in this case, to see how are they going to perceive this and what can I do to make them see it the way that I intend for them to. Prior to reading this, I never paid much attention to the fact that a great deal of students who struggle to stay engaged in readings are boys. So I noticed this really, I began to notice this year more than any other year. And I love all like, these are probably the favorite classes that I've taught this far. But this particular group does struggle to stay engaged, and it's mostly my boys. So that kind of was, you know, kind of came to my own conclusions that I see teaching in a classroom every day. This kind of set that in stone. Um, the book highlights the importance of choice. The boys need to be shown how to read, the redundance and irrelevance of traditional teaching of difficult texts, and the crucial place of meaningful social activity. Social activities, just as Wilhelm and Smith discussed within the classroom, are entirely beneficial. Students need to see how maybe their classmates perceive a text so that they can so that they can kind of see that as well. And maybe they have different interpretations that they never thought of. So, meaningful social activity is something that we may forget to do in an English language arts classroom because, we get set on writing, 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 reading, 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 but it's language as well. Speaking is language as well. So, enabling students to have the opportunity to openly speak is just as important as writing. Um, Also, the boys need to be shown how to read. We often just assume that students know how to read once they reach a level of, high school particularly. So it's important that we don't forget to go over the basic strategies. And it's important that we don't forget to carefully analyze the students as individuals to see where they are struggling the most. Overall, I highly enjoyed this book, and so did my colleagues. We had some really beneficial conversations based on this, and the sequence of events, was very cut and dry. I thought the style that the authors used was interesting, but put in a way that was easy to follow and easy to understand. He talked, just as I talked about Romeo and Juliet, Wilhelm and Smith talk about the Scarlet Letter and how it was something that the boys weren't necessarily interested in, and how disengagement happens frequently with that book, and we still continue to teach it. So, moving forward, I do plan to kind of use this as a baseline, not just for boys, but all of my students. And, be more mindful of what books can actually be beneficial for this particular group of students. So that's what this book has opened my eyes for going forth. All right, this is my works cited. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching.